Hey, how's it going, eh? Welcome back to whatever the hell this is. Part 2 of seashells in concrete, I guess. Now, I gotta say, there is a fine line between tenacity and just plain stupidity. And it's a smart man that knows when he's had his arse kicked and it's time to pull the plug. I'll let you decide which side of that fine line I happen to fall on. Here's Exhibit A. After grinding off the surface of my octopus coffee table, I made this astute observation. Oh, I'm starting to wonder if this isn't one of those things that you don't know what it is until you know what it is. You know what I mean? We shall see. I decided I would grind the surface down even deeper to try and expose more of the pattern. And then after I did that, I had this astounding revelation. Part of the problem, I think, with this particular design is there's so much aggregate that it confuses your design. You know what I mean? It gets difficult to distinguish the design from the aggregate a little bit. Gee, you think? Now when you grind down concrete, you always end up exposing these little holes in the surface because those are the little air bubbles that you didn't get out. So to fix that, you can make a slurry of just pure Portland cement and then spread that on the surface and let it dry. So that'll fill up all those little holes, and then what's left on the surface actually will just kind of powder away with a little bit of abrasion. The other issue I was having with this piece are the upside down seashells that form the little suction cups. Anybody with a bit of forethought would have realized that, but here we are. I was hoping that the slurry would fill those holes in and it wouldn't look half-ass bad, but it really didn't bind to the shells and it was easy to just pick right out. Now, with a few strikes against me on this project already, I did what any reasonable person would do. Okay, let's mix up some epoxy. That's right, I decided to fill up the little suction cups with epoxy. I just slightly overfilled each of the divots, and as you can see, the epoxy is kind of foamy, so to get rid of those bubbles, you can waft the surface with a blowtorch, and that will bring up those bubbles to the surface and pop them. You can also see that the thermal shock does fun things to the epoxy. To quote one of the most famous 20th century philosophers, "Fire made it good." Surprisingly, he's not actually wrong. Overall, this part works like a hot damn. However, it does come with a cautionary note. Here's a little tip for you. Don't assume that your brain has a reasonable facsimile of the manufacturer's instructions for for whatever. In this case, it was for this epoxy. I think I dodged a bullet here. I looked up the instructions after I'd poured the epoxy into these holes. 1-to-1 by fucking volume. And I did it by weight. Bad. Other thing is, I was going to grind this down today, but good thing I looked into the instructions, because you're supposed to leave it for like 4 days before it's ready to be aggressively handled. So we're just going to have to sit on this some more, which really is a pain in the ass, because, I said I was going to, move along with this, but I'm not gonna. So buoyed by my success with the epoxy, I dove straight into making a fresh batch of sodium silicate that I'm going to use to densify the concrete. Now, I made up a 20% solution of this, and that was based on perusing some MSDS sheets for commercial sodium silicate solutions. MSDS sheets can be a pretty decent resource if you're trying to figure out what's in something. It won't really give you the formula, but it will get you in the ballpark usually. Oh, geez, sports analogy. Sorry about that. Fuck, I hate those. After the epoxy had cured, it turned out it was super hard, like really hard to grind off, and I had to back off on the grits in order to get enough purchase on that to smooth it out. So with that done, I went ahead and densified the concrete, and that actually also seemed to work fairly well. I just continually wet the surface and then scrubbed that in with a brush. You don't have to scrub all the time, but you do have to occasionally agitate it to get it to work its way into the concrete. You're only actually densifying maybe like 1/8 of the top at the most, and it does take quite a bit of time. I think it was over an hour of just, general maintenance and reapplication. I'd made up 200 mils of the sodium silicate, and I ended up using almost all of it on this piece of concrete. That'll kind of give you an idea of how much you need to make based on the size of your project. Okay, I let it dry overnight, and there was like a sticky sort of patina on this at the end, which I just wiped off with a wet cloth, and now we're back to just the concrete. And you can tell that it, well, I think you can tell anyway, that it looks a little bit different than it did prior. It's less dusty colored, and here I've got a piece of just 400 grit sandpaper. I'm just going to rub it along with some decent pressure, and I can tell that the surface is harder. Like, it actually feels harder than before. And you can see almost nothing is coming off of this now. So other than the tabletop looking like a piece of crap, things are actually going fairly well, I would say, at this point. And now I'm off into uncharted territory. A few calculations and a quick trip to the store, and for some reason we end up doing this. Now, I know that this is kind of a dick move to make, but I'm actually not going to tell you what's going on here. I really want to leave this for another video and actually do it properly. I have lots of questions about this, and I'm not entirely sure about the correct procedure either. So I'm going to gotta figure some things out, and then we'll come back to this. So for the time being, I'm chalking this up as a learning experience, and we're going to pop this baby on the concrete abortion pile. So to find out how I solve some of the problems in Octopus 1.0, you're going to have to come back, I'm afraid. I'm already formulating a plan as we speak, which reminds me, it's time for you to bugger off so I can think. Thanks for watching. Cheers.